Hey folks, today I'm going to be talking about the Chesky Audio LC1. Retails for about $996 per pair, and you can buy them directly from the manufacturer. These speakers were loaned to me by their owner. In terms of specs, this is what the manufacturer's website states. It features a wide dispersion 1-inch dome tweeter surrounded by tessellation diffraction control technology, high resolution 6.5-inch bass mid-range driver with polypropylene cone, dual inertially balanced 8-inch fluid couple subwoofers for robust extended deep bass, breakthrough technology multi-layer high mass non-resonant cabinet, frequency response is spec'd at 50 Hz to 20 kHz, catering to a wide spectrum of sounds. That's the manufacturer's quote. High-end audiophile internal wiring, passive hardwire silver soldered precision crossover with high-quality film caps. Sensitivity is spec'd at 86 decibels at 2.83 volts 1 meter. Weight is approximately 18 pounds. Man, I just got to say that some of the terms used on this website, the surrounded by tessellation diffraction control technology, but yeah, some of this stuff to me is just a little bit over the top. But hey, it's par for the course in the audiophile world. The thing that matters the most is how they sound. So when I got the speakers in, I mean, first of all, I checked them out and I was like, oh, these are neat. The thing that stood out to me in a bad way is there's a gap around the tweeter cutout where the tweeter is, flush mounted. To me, that's kind of one of those things where, from a quality control perspective, I would like to see that more filled in so there's not a gap around the tweeter. In terms of sound, probably doesn't matter at all. But I just feel like, hey, maybe if they could fix that, it would just look a little bit better. A couple other things that I think are actually good about the speaker is the overall build quality. I took one of the passive radiators off the side and I took a shot of the inside of it, and you can see what it looks like in here. So you've got a passive radiator here. You have one on this hole right here that I've taken out. Here's your mid-range, and then the tweeter is going to be up here in the top right. This is a close-up view of the crossover network. It looks to me like it's using first-order slopes and a Zobel crossover circuit as well. When I set these up, I started with the typical 3 feet off the wall, and then I work my way back. I point them at me. I play around with the aiming and all that stuff. I got to say that no matter how I had these set up, I didn't like them. Most of the music that I listen to, I think a lot of you probably listen to it. Some of you don't, and that's fine. But it's my music, and it's what I know because I've been listening to it for decades at this point. I started out with Wanna Be Starting Something with Michael Jackson. It features a shaker on the right. That shaker definitely stood out to me, but immediately I was like, there's no punch, and there's the vocal obviously is there because, I could hear somebody singing, but it wasn't very present. So with resonance, we typically deem that as a bad thing, right? But what makes your throat and generate the sound that it generates is your throat's a Helmholtz resonator, essentially. So it's a resonator. That's how you go like this and all this stuff. That's how you talk. So to some degree, there should be some chestiness, some resonance in a vocal, not necessarily created by the speaker, but just from the manner of talking itself. So when I'm listening to these speakers, it just sounds really dull and hollow through the mid-range. Sounded that way with female vocals too. Now I'm going to look at my notes real fast because some of these things I won't remember off the top of my head, so you just have to bear with me for a second, okay? I wrote that the hand claps sound dull on Wanna Be Starting Something. Shaker on the right stands out. Other sounds like the clicking sound. So there's a click sound in that song, and it's in the background. It shouldn't jump out at you, but it should not sink all the way into the background. With a good pair of neutral sounding speakers, it should be present, but not draw attention to itself per se. And in this particular case, it sounded like it was just recessed, like it was kind of hidden behind everything else in the song. The vocals sounded thin or hollow, and there was no bass to speak of. Now, when I switched over to Norah Jones, Chasing Pirates, is another one of my favorite tracks, the center focus sounded off. When I'm listening for center, I'm doing kind of one of these, right? Like I went to Axpona over the weekend, and I'm doing one of kind of these things like, hey, where's the center at? Because sometimes an asymmetric room or, an asymmetric setup, things like that will cause the center to not quite focus up as it should. So I did that with this speaker, and no matter how I've moved my head within this like reasonable area, the center did not lock in like it should have. Hang on to that because I'm going to come back to that when we get to the data, okay? There's a hum or feedback sound on this track. It was also low in the mix. Now, it's kind of like the the cracking, clicking sound or whatever in the Michael Jackson track that I just talked about, where it should be there, you should hear it, but it shouldn't jump out, but it should not be recessed either, okay? In terms of the overall mix, it's there, but it doesn't call attention to itself. So that's the hum feedback. Now, on these speakers, it was too low. It was just way recessed. The background vocals, the people that were singing backup, or, it could just be that it's Norah Jones's vocal and it's panned to different sides, but I don't think that's the case. Regardless, they stood out, they stood forward, and they were grainy. And I didn't like that. Now, flipping over to another Norah Jones track, Waiting. This track has a strong bass note to it that will reverberate, and it fills up the room in the recording. There was no air in the higher frequency. There was no room reverberation filled up from the lower frequency. You don't get that with these speakers. I certainly didn't. Not with the standard 3 feet off the wall. And when I noticed that, I thought, well, now it's time. Let's push these speakers against the wall. So in doing that, I got a little bit more low bass, but it still wasn't enough. I was able to tell that these speakers were not playing below. It sounded like 100 hertz was kind of where they just stopped in room. The other notes that I had was that it sounded just flat overall, which I was kind of surprised by. But there's some reasoning for that in the data, I think. So we'll talk about that too. I also noticed that, it just wasn't that engaging in the vocal overall. I just got to be honest, overall, it's not my cup of tea. Now, having said that, I did listen to these speakers at Xpona, and I was hoping that maybe it was just something with my pair of speakers. That wasn't the case. When I listened to them at Xpona, the same thing, the two main things that I noticed with them in my home is what I noticed in Xpona. And that was the recessed mid-range. There's no weight to the vocals, female or male. And then the bass is just practically non-existent, okay? So I think that if you are going to buy these speakers, you're interested enough to try them out, I highly encourage you, point them directly at you. Also put them close to a wall. They're going to benefit from that. They're going to get some lower mid-range reinforcement from the boundary of the wall behind it. And they're also going to get some lower bass reinforcement from the same thing. Now, you may find that you need to bring down about 100 hertz a little bit because there is some impact from that region, but it stands out because the roll-off is so sharp below that. And you're going to see exactly what I mean when we get to the data. Before we get into the data, I'm going to play you the typical sound clip that I do. Note that in this particular case, I have high-passed the pink noise above 80 hertz. And that way it will give you a better idea of the tonality of the speaker without having to account for the fact that, the bass doesn't exist. Most bookshelves is going to roll off, so I don't really know if that's a fair comparison. So I like to high pass the pink noise, let you focus more on the lower mid-range, upper mid-bass, and up from there. So let's go ahead and do that first. Now let's take a look at the data. All of the data that you're about to see is captured using the Klippel near-field scanner. It is a state-of-the-art robotic device that allows me to get anechoic data in a non-anechoic environment. And it tells us what the speaker is doing before you put it into a room. That way you're able to suss out, hey, some of these things that I'm hearing, is it the room or is it the speaker? And that allows me to diagnose some problems and give some feedback without you having to rely solely on my subjective experience. This is the on-axis frequency response, average sensitivity measured at about 81.4 decibels. F3 is at 71 hertz, F10 is at 49 hertz. You can see the speaker below about 100 or 90 hertz. It just starts rolling off very quickly. So there really is no low bass to speak of at all in this speaker. The other things that stand out to me, it looks like maybe they could have done a better job with the baffle step compensation here. This could be intentional, but this right here through this region is why I felt like the vocals, male and female, were so subdued. This peaking right through here is going to stand out as forward. Depending on what instrument you're listening to, like a snare, it might jump out at you and have a little bit more attack. But for the most part, this only served to make this mid-range sound lower in level. And then on the higher frequency end, so the upper mid-range area, you're losing some attack with some instruments, but then you're turning right back around and gaining it in this lower treble region. If you've watched enough of my reviews, I'll just start with there. If you've watched enough of my reviews, you've probably seen some reviews where, a speaker has some characteristics where it maybe starts trending upward in the higher frequency. And maybe I don't care for that, but it's not a huge deal because with tonal balance controls, you can take that down if you want to. The ones that really kind of throw me for a loop are speakers like this, where there's peaks and dips and peaks and dips, and it's really hard to get a feel for the speaker because one instrument that covers a few octaves may sound completely different depending on what frequency it's playing at the time. Now let's take a look at the CEA 2034 data set. The black is the same thing you just saw, and then the blue is the early reflections, and then the red is the sound power. Now, in terms of objective measurements, this is a pretty bad performer, okay? This dip right through here absolutely called attention to itself when I saw the data. I thought, what the heck is going on there? We'll see in a minute. The other thing that I thought, and this is honest to goodness, when I fired these speakers up, I thought something may have been broken just because they did not sound right to me. And there's been a lot of praise in the audiophile press recently about these. So I took both speakers, I grabbed my Dayton DATs, it's like a $120 tool. I did a quick impedance sweep on both, and they matched reasonably well. It told me that one's not broken, because if one's broken, then they're both broken. So surely not both are broken. So they're both as designed. And then I did reach out to the manufacturer. He was a really nice dude. I kind of said, hey man, I'm seeing some stuff and I don't want to publish my data if it's not reflective of what the product actually is. So we went back and forth a little bit, and then he sent me his measurement as well, and my measurement matched his. So with that said, this has kind of all been vetted out pretty thoroughly at this point. It just, frankly, it just doesn't look good. So let's look at the other speaker's response. And this is what I got. Okay, so I'm gonna switch back. This is sample 1, and then this is sample 2. Now, when I saw this, and the reason I did this is because I wanted to see how close they are. When I saw this, I thought, that's probably why the focus could never get just right. Like, no matter how I position my head, I can never get the focus to lock in. And I shouldn't have that experience with, especially like a dome tweeter type design. Now, maybe if it was an AMT or ribbon tweeter or something where it's got a really narrow window, I could see that, but not with the dome tweeter. So seeing this speaker's response versus the other speaker response, it gives me a good indication that this is why I wasn't getting the focus that I expected to get. This is the estimated in-room, and then this is a line kind of indicating how I heard the speaker, and this is pretty much bang on, okay? So my listening notes very well align with this. In-room extension, I'm saying to about 80 hertz, and it's hard to say. Some guitars, they'll get in that region and they'll stay in that pocket, and it's easy to tell. If you're trying to listen for 50 or 60 hertz, kick drum's always going to give it away. There was no kick drum. I just didn't have that. So that certainly explains why I was lacking kick drum. This bump right here makes some instruments stand out a little bit more. And usually I would enjoy this little bit of extra thump, but not at the expense of having a scooped out mid-range, which is what I'm hollering. I saw hollow right there, which is what I'm indicating here, okay? And then going up through the upper mid-range area, hey, it kind of lines out. We're all right. But then when you get to the tweeter level, that's when the response really just starts to dive back down. This, I think, does a really good job of matching up with the overall sensation that I had of this speaker, that it just wasn't engaging to me. It just sounded kind of lifeless, for a lack of better words. You don't have a lot of bass, and the highs roll off pretty quickly. This is the burst decay, and the burst decay, I think it looks okay. This is the horizontal contour plot, about plus or minus 60 to 70 degrees horizontal width, which I like. Okay, so the horizontal width and radiation of the speaker I thought was pretty good. The thing about this speaker that I'm not used to seeing, at least that I can recall, is how quickly it narrows up. These frequencies are not going to reflect off the wall because they're so narrow. They're basically just kind of shooting forward. The vertical contour plot explains a lot, all right? So this lobing region right through here, this is a cancellation between the mid-range and the tweeter. I'm going to blame that on first order crossover filters. I can't imagine that there's much else that's causing that. I did notice in the near field response that it looked like there may be some overlap in the crossover region. Again, I don't know because I didn't design the speaker and I'd have to fully deconstruct it to know for sure. But the things that I'm seeing here kind of lend me to think that's the case. So there's some crossover overlap, and then these shallow crossover slopes are causing some cancellation right below the tweeter line. So when you listen to the speaker, you really need to listen dead on the tweeter axis or maybe slightly above it. But if you listen below that tweeter axis, you're going to get some weird stuff going on. Now, this right here also explains this dip in the directivity. Now let's look at the distortion. 86 decibels at 1 meter, 96 decibels at 1 meter. Honestly, this could be worse, right? I do like the fact that there's good separation between the second order and third order distortion. This right here, I think is going to pop back up again. So let's see. Multi-tone distortion. This region right here aligns with what appears to be a cone edge surround resonance. They're basically playing the same frequency, but they're out of sync, and that creates a resonance. You'll see it in ScanSpeak drivers. You'll see it in audio technology drivers, ScanSpeak drivers. I just say ScanSpeak. Sorry. Dynaudio drivers and others as well. So, I've certainly seen it other places, and it usually shows up as an increase in distortion in that same region. If you cross this over at 80 hertz, then you lower the mid-range distortion a little bit, but you don't gain a lot. Long-term compression looks okay. Max out at about 95 decibels per my measurement. Instantaneous compression, though, shows issues, right? So on the lower frequency end, lower mid-range, you're limited. Going from 76 to 96, you got about 20 decibels of usable dynamic range with the speaker. However, if you look right through here, this is kind of interesting that you've got a dip in this region. Now, this could be crossover or driver related, but I do also wonder if this isn't that cone edge surround resonance issue that I talked about earlier. So I'm pointing it out as a possible issue from that. This is some near field drive unit measurements, and I just wanted to see how they measure. You'll notice that there's a difference between the sample 2 tweeter in purple and the sample 1 tweeter in blue. You'll also notice that there's some differences in the 2 samples midwoofers. And then we've got the passive radiators. I didn't measure both speaker samples. I just measured 1 speaker sample, but both passive radiators, they're acting kind of the same. So there does seem to be some quality control based on the parts that are inside the speaker and the relative cost of those. I'd probably just chalk it up to the actual drive units itself. The increased group delay right through this 500 to 1 kilohertz region, that aligns with this passive radiator resonance. Now we look at the impedance. Overall impedance, minimum about 8.4, EPDR 5.4, super easy speaker to drive, no issues there. But there are some resonances that I'm going to note. We got one at around 300 hertz. We've got another one around about maybe 700 hertz or so. And then it looks like another one around about 1 kilohertz. That does it for this review. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, leave them in the comment section below. These have made it to a few different shows, so if you've been able to listen to them in person, let me know what you think. Even though the speaker is not my cup of tea and there's some glaring issues for me, I'm still interested to know what the rest of you all have to say. And with that said, I'm going to bail out, and I'll talk to you all later. Take care.